Welcome back to Cedarburg. Today we're going to be focused on a few different projects, but primarily learning how to break the grid, especially away from our downtown area and moving into different parts of our city. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with your thoughts on what we should be doing next in Cedarburg. And of course, remember that there is a playlist of all the episodes of Cedarburg. This is actually our 5th episode, and this city and the episodes are really about kind of talking and learning and having conversations about the things that we pick up on as we begin to dive further and further into cities too. So obviously, as I mentioned, the focus of today's episode is breaking the grid. This is something that I think we all can find a time where we've struggled with it or we've had some difficulty in figuring out how. And I think it's an important thing to practice and to sort of learn how you want to break the grid, because it can do a lot for you in terms of making your city very interesting or dynamic. And it really adds a lot of value if you can do it very efficiently and not lose a ton of space. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how I go about that. And we're going to be doing an example of that, as well as talking about what I've already done to accomplish the goal. So the first thing I wanted to get in place is this interchange. This is going to give us a little bit more high rate infrastructure built off of what we already set up in previous episodes of the series. I'm effectively trying to create a little bit of a loop so that there's multiple ways to get on some of our infrastructure that is going to exist here, and hopefully disperse traffic. Although I do think we are going to need another interchange that helps dispense traffic into the city from the highway system, but we'll get to that probably in the next episode or so. Now, looking at the city, you can tell we've already started breaking the grid, and this can be done a few different ways. So one way is obviously to have let's say a 90-degree road, and you intersect it on a 45-degree angle and then at another 90-degree perpendicular angle, right? Another way I tend to break the grid is by having some sort of line that helps just stop the monotony of the grid. So you could say the highway or the road at the top of the city that is running parallel to the highway. Now, the idea there is that you're sort of breaking the influence of the grid that currently exists, and then you can shift into a different direction if you'd like. But probably the most common is just shifting the direction of the road. So like here, you've got the angled roads leading into this 90-degree straight up and down road, and then you have 90 degrees off of that road, perpendicular to the road that's running from the river to the highway. But you tend to end up with these situations where you have these bigger gaps because of the angles you're choosing. And of course, without assets to plop down right now and sort of zoning capability that sometimes can be a little finicky anyways, it can be a challenge to make these blocks feel like it's on purpose and not by maybe an accident. So there's a couple of things you can do, in my opinion, for these blocks that are oddly shaped that you can't really fill the zoning on, right? Now, you can do several things. You could add alleyways, which is something that I enjoy doing when I can, to maybe add parking lots in or something like that in the middle. You could also do a park. You'd obviously do pedestrian pathing. You could do a little bit of everything. What's often helpful is just ploppable buildings. So if you have a good signature building that can take up a decent amount of that space, maybe integrate a parking lot into that block, that could be a helpful way of filling the area along with some trees. I do admit that right now, with the tools that we have and without mods, sometimes it can be a little bit of a daunting task to try to make some of these blocks feel as integrated as maybe just a block that is a rectangle or a square. You sometimes run into issues where you can't really do a ton without a lot of overlap on zones, breaking some of your zones, things like that. For this particular block, I'm just going to use some pedestrian paths, put a parking lot obviously in the middle on an alleyway, and we're going to sort of see where this goes. Although I do think this area is going to grow up eventually. In fact, we'll probably include some mixed use in this block so that there are going to be basically taller buildings and things that feel a little bit more substantial than just low density commercial. So I'm going to use some geometric shapes to tie some of this together. If I had mods and potentially assets, I would do this a little bit differently. I'd be looking to maybe even use dev mode to make the parking lot sort of fit the space, even if it was just extra concrete padding around it to fit the buildings that were backed up against the parking lot, just to make this all feel a little bit more integrated in a better way. Like reflecting back to Cities 1, that was often something I would lean on, was finding ways of expanding parking lots or just pavement areas so that it all felt like it was tied together, built at the same time, something along those lines. I've actually started to play with dev mode and look and see what opportunities there are just within that of detailing. And there's definitely options to integrate certain things better, to clean up some lines, maybe add a little bit of pavement here and there, and that can do a lot. I know that even if I just had an anarchy mod, that might make this a little bit easier, especially if you're trying to get some of these paths really close to one another. And obviously zooming out, it kind of looks funky without buildings. I don't think this is maybe the best route for this area, or the shape and the design and stuff like that. So I think this will be something we revisit, but I know that these areas are often where you see the break-in zone, right? These are often the areas that are hard to fill, especially when you're just, utilizing zoning as your method of building. Now, zooming out, obviously we've got buildings that need to fill the space, and probably once those are in place, we can see what we need to change, or if we could just do something different that appears better. But for now, I'm going to leave it. We're going to let it fill in, and we'll go from there. And I also think we could probably leave it for a couple episodes, let the buildings eventually be upgraded to, higher densities, and then see where that whole block lands. But the point is like, find ways of incorporating paths and things like that to fill the space. Even if you just do a really dense layer of trees in there just to take up some of that room, I think it'll help clean up your grid breaks, because I honestly feel like sometimes just fighting those awkward spaces are part of the reason you tend to stick with grids longer, or that first grid you start building on longer. If you have the opportunity though, sort of like what I'm doing here, is filling in this large space in the corner of this highway area in the city itself, because I do think ultimately like we have enough room to put some houses or something in here. Maybe we will do something along the lines of like some medium density buildings in the space, or some townhomes or whatever, sort of fade out from the downtown area. Once again, it's one of those challenges. It's one of those spots where you're trying to figure out, okay, I need to break the grid. I'm working to break the grid, but the grid is so nice and easy to zone. I don't have to worry about zone breaks as much, and I can just have continuous grid. But then again, you don't really make your city very interesting from the outside looking in, right? When you zoom out, it's all going to be the same thing repeated. So when you have the opportunity to find those ways of shifting or changing the angle, it's going to do a lot for whatever you're building. I just know there's sort of a little bit of hesitancy when you are doing that, because you don't want to necessarily have to deal with those awkward spaces. But I think they're just another thing that you sometimes have to just figure out ways of filling and be creative around. Now, for the most part, I've been setting up room between the highway system and the city that is just going to be natural space. There's a little bit of a slope there too that we're just going to apply a brush of trees on. We've kind of already done that mostly, but I'm going to use this alleyway just to close that space just a little bit more, at least in this more dense area of town. And then as we move away from the city, I think you can afford more space to go around the highway system. So like I mentioned before, one way that I sometimes deal with breaking the grid is to incorporate larger roads, whether that's highways or avenues or something. And now we've already used an avenue on one side that we connected to, and we changed the angle, but now we have a highway here that actually, in my eyes, sort of breaks the grid and breaks a little bit of the monotony. It gives us a chance to alter the angles that we're using. So ultimately, this feels pretty natural, right? This should, in some ways, break the grid. Now, you could do this multiple ways. You could have it be something as simple as let's say a submerged road, right, with roads on the outsides of them, and then you can change the grid structure a little bit or do something different. But in this case, it's meant to be very natural. We have this sort of boundary area around the highway itself, and I'm just building up to that boundary. But everything then above the highway towards the mountains is going to be a little bit of a different grid structure. Now, I mimicked it a little bit with one of the suburbs we did in the last episode, but for the most part, we can operate a little bit on a different template. Now, whether you have a highway or maybe something like a small river, you can still utilize that as a way of altering the grid angle. Rivers, creeks, anything like that, any sort of geography could also do that for you. So now we're going to expand on the other end of town, and we're going to start working this way. And this is where we're going to do another example of how we can break the grid format that we already have. So we're going to be shifting it as we move into the highway that we set up in the first part of the episode. Sometimes when you have all of these grids or all of these very straight and angular roads, something really nice to incorporate is some curvature. So if you can find opportunities to have that curved road running through the grid and you do it just right, sometimes it looks really, really good. I'm not necessarily going to do that for our grid. Instead, I'm going to do a little bit of a harder shift, but we're going to utilize some of the terrain to help guide some of that decision making. But there will be a curved road featured on the southern end closer to the water that I think will be kind of a neat touch if we're able to incorporate it well. So to dictate how the grid is going to break, I'm going to take one road and I'm going to build a road off of that that's going to be 90 degrees. That road is going to start at the elevated fill road that we've set up on the left side of the screen here. This is helpful because I think it helps keep some cohesion across what I'm doing. I don't want it to be something that just feels completely out of place. You could even do this with like a curved road or something along those lines to really, really mix it up. But for now, this is how I want to set it up. I just want to shift the grid in a different direction. Part of this shift in the direction that I've made it is also to complement the river and the direction that the river's going. Obviously, the river is going to turn, it's going to curve. So this road, I think, will give us a little bit more space to build and not have everything running along the lines that have already been established, which are largely set in place because of where the river was in the starting area of our city. Since I've been pretty terrible at measuring stuff out, I do need to keep in mind that I would like to expand the high school and have the sports complex attached to it. So I like to have that factored in as something to add to this area. Obviously, we have a little bit of space closer to the highway if we need to kind of make some adjustments, but for now, I'm not going to put it in because I don't want to continue to add to our deficit until we have some balance. We don't have that many high school students yet, so I don't think it's super critical, but it is something I would like to factor in, and kind of reserve space for, but we'll see how everything kind of works out in the long run. So now that we have established this grid break, we have a new road in place, we can start building the new grid off of that in a new angle. And the reason that it's going to continue to be a grid is because largely this is still what I would consider part of our downtown area. I don't know how far it'll go, but let's say we transition away from buildings, I'm still going to utilize some grids for some of our neighborhoods, especially if I want them to seem like older neighborhoods that are a part of, the earlier days of the city. Like I've said, the idea here behind Cedarburg is to consistently try to evolve different parts of town. So a lot of the low density residential in town is going to be upgraded, though at least the stuff that we have now. And then I'll begin to, transition more of that to suburbs as we progress. So as that low density downtown area kind of goes into being row housing and medium density and high density, you'll have suburbs cropping up away from the downtown. And then this whole area hopefully will grow into a big sort of city center. I think one unfortunate thing right now, though, totally unrelated, is that we're now in winter, so we don't have the beautiful autumn look. We don't have that lighting and all that we tend to enjoy more so than any other season, it seems. So now we're stuck in the rain, possibly snow at some point, and this is where we live. Unfortunately, it's not going to look as good, but we'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. I'm probably going to upgrade to 3 speed as we continue through to just get through some of the winter months so we have pretty lighting. As goofy as that is, I do hope we at some point get the ability to alter what season we're in or change, some of the lighting about the seasons, because I just think this is like way so extra dreary. I don't know. It's really intense, and it kind of kills the vibes a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and draw the highway so that I know pretty much where this is going to go to create the loop that I want to create. It's going to tie in with the main highway system across the river, but to get there we have to cut through this new area that we're starting to develop. But I think this will look cool in the long run because we can have buildings around this highway and make this really something that runs right through the middle of maybe part of the city or part of like an uptown area, slightly distanced from downtown. I guess we'll see how everything develops. I'm kind of jumping ahead on a lot of this, but theoretically it'd be kind of cool. And that's something that I tend to not do, is have highways sort of running through downtown. So I'm kind of interested to see where this could go. Part of me thinks I need to incorporate an interchange here to let people off the highway and into the city. Have this be an area where a lot of traffic can enter or exit the highway system, because then you'd be connected by highway to different parts of the city. So that may be something we need to factor in. I'm just not sure how, given the terrain and the area that we're building in, how I want to go about it. Maybe I need to find some sort of easy entrance and exit ramp that I could do in the space allotted, because there's not a ton of room, which makes it less complex, but also more complex because you're not gonna have a lot of room to do a whole bunch of stuff. But maybe I can find something that can work and attach to one of these roads here that intersect the highway underneath. Now, I don't know if this whole system or the whole look of the city is very good, but we have successfully broken away from the grid in a couple directions. To some degree, I think anytime you're building a city and you're trying to project where the city's going to go, you may run into situations where you do certain things or you set up these grids and all that you still have to develop on, even though your city is largely growing, with a sense of hope that maybe you can figure it out in the long run. And that's definitely to some degree where I think I am. We're going to try to figure it out as we progress. Now, one thing in addition to what we've set up here is that organic road that I mentioned earlier that I want to incorporate sort of underneath the highway and where it's running over some of the gridded areas that we've already created. I'm going to have this road that kind of runs along the river actually connect up to this upper area. I don't know what's really going to go down here other than some pedestrian pathing and just have it be a little bit of a riverfront area. But I'm also going to incorporate a road that is more organic that wraps around underneath the highway here before it crosses the river. And I think that will be something else to add into what we're doing. Could that be at some point some sort of subdivision? Maybe. but it just gives us something else that's broken away from the grid. Now that I'm thinking about it, it could be interesting to have houses around this hill or on this hill, progressing up from the river to the highway at its peak there, and then have that be something where maybe we use alleyways and sort of some of the methods we've used for creating our suburbs to create a little bit of a tiered subdivision. That might be kind of nice, although I don't want every road to have fill beneath it. It just looks good. After some heavy duty fiddling around, I basically got a road that has about half of it done with fill beneath, especially under the highway, that it actually rolls back up the hill to combine with some of the infrastructure we've already set up here, or that we are setting up. So you can see it, we got a nice fill beneath, although it is bumpy. Need to fix that as it's adapting to different terrain heights, as well as me trying to tell where to go. But once we blend this in some and maybe fix a couple of these bumps, I think this will be a nice road to have. Just figuring out what goes around it might also be another little challenge we have to figure out. And then we can go ahead and extend our highway over the river and have this as a placeholder for later when we feel like integrating this into the highway system that was built on the map. And then all of this will be sort of interconnected. And then again, we still have the question of like, do we add an interchange here somewhere on this side of town with this highway infrastructure, or do we do it a little bit further down? I'll leave that as something you guys maybe would help me decide. Like, do you guys feel like there should be an interchange that, you know, allow people off the highway and into the city right here? Maybe on this hill is where we do it. Maybe that's how we can take up some room there. I guess that would solve a couple of things for us. But as I zoom out, you can see now how we've broken the grid, but it still feels connected to the town. We do have a large piece of space there that we are going to have to figure out how to fill, much like we did earlier in the episode. But ultimately, I think we have set up something that is relatively easy to build off of. I think there are some zone breaks. I may have to redo a couple roads and see how some of this can all work a little bit better in terms of just the zoning. But ultimately, like, we've now broken off the original grid in pretty much every direction, which is kind of cool. So I'm interested to see how this grows up, especially, again, as we upgrade buildings to different densities and fill in everything north of the highway. I think one of our big projects that's coming up is also getting some rails in here, some railways, to have a passenger station a little bit closer to town, or maybe we'll just keep that on the far north side of town, maybe near the college. That's something else we need to incorporate. We can always go in and add a subway system as well to help with traffic. But I am kind of interested to see how this will look once Cedarburg begins to really kind of grow up. So I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I know this isn't a straight up tutorial, but more so a conversation around breaking the grid. And hopefully this gives you some ideas to try and some examples of how I break the grid and how I kind of set up new areas. And if you did, obviously drop a like, leave a comment down below with your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes. Hit the subscribe button. We've almost hit 6,000 subs, and I'll catch you guys next time.